used all my best material, so all downhill from here. So I was going to read through a section of the Bible with the kids, which I thought was going to last like 3 weeks or a month, right? And it turned out to last 3 months. And I was trying to think of what we should read. Well, we'd read some Gospels together. We'd already read Luke and John. And we'd read some Pentateuch, right? And I thought, I remember a long time ago, I had read through Kings and Chronicles, and I always thought that they made some really interesting reading. Even apart from everything else, it's interesting stories written in an interesting way, but in a formulaic way, right? There's parallels to all these stories that go on in there. And I thought that not only could middle school kids pick up on it as they're reading along, but there's enough deep stuff there to ask them leading questions during classes and whatnot and build homework around it. So in rereading First Kings, I came to think of it as like something quite fascinating after a while, and weird. There's weird things going on in these books. God, 3 different times God makes wild animals kill somebody. Which was always one of my favorite things in the Bible. You have big stars. You have Elijah. You have Elisha. You have Solomon, of course. These are the books where Solomon's reign is described. And then you have some really great minor figures. So to put it into some perspective, the Book of Kings and the Book of Samuel originally are one book in Hebrew. They became multiple books when translated, I believe, to the Vulgate. I have to look that up. But then subsequently have been 2 books in Hebrew again since a long time. In Hebrew tradition, they're written by the prophet Jeremiah, but that's not true. The best guess is that there's multiple authors and multiple editors over multiple years. So there was some theory for a while that they were that they were official court records. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you're actually reading them, because a lot of sections about various kings will end with, and everything else is written in the official records, So you're not reading the official records. Also, the average person wouldn't have access to the official records, right? And the official records wouldn't have records of intrigues and kings who screwed up. They'd all be whitewashed like that. So it's probably a compilation of the writings of prophets, right? Over roughly 500 years of history here. Well, a little bit more, a little bit less, from about the 11th century to the 6th century BC. Right? So when Kings starts, and the Kings is a direct, continuation from Samuel, but when Kings starts, you're talking about the Near East, where it's taking place, kind of leading the world into the Iron Age, while everyone else is still in the Bronze Age. And when Kings ends with Judah and the fall of Samaria going into Babylonian captivity, now you're talking about, in the 6th century, some really great thinkers around the world. So that's the same century as Confucius, as Buddha, as Pythagoras, as one of my favorites, Zoroaster or Zarathustra, all in the same century there. And so that's where it ends. And it's a nice little chunk of history, and it's good stuff. It's also not about the political and historical events of the kings. These authors, the prophetic authors, are not trying to emphasize the history necessarily. I thought the history made it easy for the kids to read, and I think it makes it fun for us to read. But the point is about how well these kings and these dynasties upheld the covenant relationship with God. Right? And the way you can tell the history and the politics aren't the important thing is that there are some kings. An example that springs to mind is, I think his name is Omri or Umri, who ended up, one of the few kings listed here, who ended up on in transcriptions in other surrounding neighbors' countries on their statues and whatnot as an important person. Hundreds of years later, he had finally successfully suppressed the Moabites, who had been a pain in the neck for forever. But in the Bible, he gets like 6 lines, and it ends with, and he was like basically another one who sinned and didn't walk in the ways of David, because what he did wasn't the important part. It wasn't the key. The key was, are they fulfilling the covenant relationship? Are they holding up their end of the bargain? If they did, they ended up looking really good in the book. Right? If they didn't, they didn't. And it had very little to do with how successful they were in a kingly way, in a way that the neighbors would see, so to speak. Now, it didn't necessarily mean they were unpopular with their people at the time, though. I bet Ahab was a hit with the actual community of Israelites, but the prophets, not so much. So, one second. Now, I talk a lot, and I want y'all to feel free to interrupt me whenever you feel like it.
Okay.
Either because you have something to say or just because you're tired of hearing me talk. Both those things are completely understandable. But I thought the thing to do would be to just read some Bible, and then I'll pause her once in a while and we can talk about what's going on and some of the history behind it.
Excuse me, Kevin.
Yes.
Remind me, are you doing 2 weeks of this or 3 or 1?
Well, we're scheduled for 2.
Okay.
And we'll see where it goes. Like, I'm not going to get through First Kings, much less all of Kings, in 2 weeks. Although I'm not reading the whole thing straight out verbatim either. There's especially during Solomon's reign, there's lots of chapters of lists, and basically it reads like a bill of lading for a while there. So that part could be skipped. So I'll skip around some good parts, but we'll see how long it goes. I figure people come and go, and if no one is interested after a couple of weeks, then the last couple of weeks. If people want to keep going, I'm not doing anything else. Yeah. So I think the idea was to see how it goes. So I have a Bible here, but I also have the NIV text that I can screen share, and you'll still hear me, and I'll still hear you. So I think it might be best if I do that, so we're all looking at the same thing. All right, one sec. Oh, that didn't work. All right. All right, do y'all see that?
No.
No, okay. That did not work. I think what I need to do, the shared window is closed, is go this way. When you're looking at me, do you see my Zoom window up right now, or do I appear the same as I did a minute ago?
Same as you did before.
Okay, one second then.
I think you should just go to screen share and then click on the window, don't you?
Yeah, I should, but it didn't work. Oh, I know what I did wrong. Okay, one second.
No problem. We're used to, at least I'm used to glitches. I always have problems.
Yeah, well, I'm the glitch here. I know what went wrong, and what went wrong was me.
We've all been learning Zoom. That's been the big.
Yes, we are.
And the thing of it was, like, I've done this for several months, and I took a month off, and it's all new again.
Yep.
All right, here we go. that, share.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. I thought so. So, in chapter 1, we start off with a real bang. King David's still alive. Now, King David, the star of the last 3 books of the Bible, he's up there in years. He's 70, actually, but for the time, and he's on his way out, but he's not out yet. So makes a guest appearance here at the beginning of Kings. So just reading from 1:1 here. King David was very old. He could not keep warm even when they put covers over him. So his attendants said to him, "Let us look for a young virgin to serve the king and take care of him. She can lie beside him so that our Lord the king may keep warm." Now, when I read that, I thought, now that's service. You don't get that kind of service anymore. Like maybe you get a raggedy blanket, but very rarely do the servants go, let's go find a young virgin. So they searched throughout Israel for a beautiful young woman. I think it would probably be a reality show today is how they'd find that for King David, and found Abishag, a Shunammite, which is just a town. It's not an ethnicity, and brought her to the king. The woman was very beautiful. She took care of the king and waited on him, but the king had no sexual relations with her. And that's important later, I think. Now Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, put himself forward and said, "I will be king." So David's already had survived one coup attempt, right, of Absalom. And this is son number 3. I can't remember what happened to son number 2, but he's down to son number 3, and son number 3 is trying to revolt as well now. And he says, "I will be king." So he got his chariots and his horses ready and 50 men to run ahead of him. So he got himself a little private army together. And his father, here's a parenthetical, his father had never rebuked him by asking, why do you behave as you do? He was also very handsome and was born next after Absalom. Here's not only is that got some interesting information, but it's also another way that this is written over by many authors over lots of time. Because even when there's not literal parentheses, there's a lot of those kinds of sides all throughout Kings and Chronicles. So he's very handsome. Apparently that's also important. Adonijah conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar, the priest. By the way, I'll mispronounce everything, but I'll mispronounce it consistently. And they gave him their support. But Zadok the priest, Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, Shimei, and Ray, and David's special guard did not join Adonijah. So he's got Joab on his side. He put Joab in his pocket. If we had read Samuel, he would have been, because Joab is a big deal. If someone wants to overthrow King David, Joab is a good guy to go after to have in your pocket, because he was a big star in Samuel leading the armies of Israel. Adonijah then sacrificed sheep, cattle, and fatted calves at the stone of Zeholeth near En-Rogel. He invited all his brothers, king's sons, and all the royal officials of Judah, but he did not invite Nathan the prophet, nor Benaiah, or the special guard, or his brother Solomon. So, what's going to happen to Solomon if this happened? If Adonijah gets to keep the kingship, Solomon's. Well, that would be it for Solomon. Because the first thing you're going to do is consolidate your power. It's going to be the first thing Solomon does. Then Nathan asked Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, another star of earlier texts, "Have you not heard that Adonijah, the son of Haggith, has become a king, and our Lord David knows nothing about it? Now then, let me advise you how you can save your life and the life of your son Solomon. Go into King David and say to him, 'My lord the king, did you not swear to me your servant? Surely Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he will sit on my throne. Why then has Adonijah become king? While you are there still talking to the king, I will come in and add my word to what you have said. According to some text notes that I had when I looked up later, there's no actual record of this promise earlier given to Bathsheba that Solomon would be king. But since it's not challenged by David, I assume that it happened. Right. So Bathsheba went to see the aged king in his room, where Abishag the Shunammite was attending him. Bathsheba bowed down, prostrating herself before the king. What do you want? The king asked. And then she says exactly what she's supposed to say. Right. And she mentions who has and who hasn't joined sides, basically. All right. And as according to plan, Nathan, who himself is pretty darn old, well, Nathan comes in and he gives the same story. Nathan said in 24, have you, my lord the king, declared that Adonijah shall be king after you, and he will sit on your throne? Today he has gone down and sacrificed great numbers of cattle, fattened calves, and sheep. And he goes on to say exactly what's been going on. So Bathsheba and then Nathan, following suit, go and tell him the same thing. I always wondered, like, why they didn't just tell him at the same time. But I guess it's wise. It sounds more convincing, right? If someone's telling you something and then someone else rushes in and says the same thing, rather than going together. You know, they didn't know it. They didn't work it out ahead of time. More convincing that way. Then King David said, call on Bathsheba. So she came into the king's presence and stood before him. Apparently she had left at some point, because there she was, come back in. The king then took an oath. As surely as the Lord lives, he who has delivered me out of every trouble, I will surely carry out this very day what I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel. Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he will sit on my throne in my place. And Bathsheba bowed down with her face to the ground, prostrating herself before the king, and said, may my lord King David live forever. So all the the court hyperbole that would be present in any sort of rich kingdom is in place here, with prostration and face to the ground and may you live forever. And well, by the way, he's being covered by a virgin because he's so cold, so that probably isn't going to happen. King David said, call in Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Immanuel son of Jehoiada. When they came before the king, he said to them, take your Lord's servants with you, and have Solomon my son mount my own mule. Interesting, mules shouldn't be there, right? Crossbreeding is prohibited by the Mosaic covenant, but whatever. And take him down to Gihon. There have Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him king over Israel. Blow the trumpet and shout, long live King Solomon. Then you are to go up with him, and he is to come and sit on my throne and reign in my place. I have appointed him ruler over Israel and Judah. So King David, in order to secure the line that he chooses, is in effect abdicating immediately to Solomon, right? Which is both humble and very politically astute. Right? So Benaiah son of Jehoiada answered the king, amen. May the Lord, the God of my lord the king, so declare it. As the Lord was with my lord the king, capital L, small l, so may he be with Solomon to make his throne even greater than the throne of my lord King David. So the three of them, the big three, Zadok, Nathan, Benaiah, along with the Kerethites and the Pelethites, went down and had Solomon mount King David's mule, and they escorted him to Gihon. Kerethites and Pelethites, according to some text notes here, maybe Pelethites is some sort of Philistine city. They were special guards, perhaps. Kerethites, I mean, maybe from Crete, apparently, but no one knows. They're mentioned also in Samuel, but and also together as some sort of like special guard. But what exactly they were. Not quite sure. But they're loyal. They're the loyal special guard. So Zadok the priest took the horn of oil from the sacred tent and anointed Solomon. Then they sounded the trumpet, and all the people shouted, "Long live King Solomon!" And all the people went up after him, playing pipes and rejoicing greatly, so that the ground shook with the sound. Now, if you notice, all the people are one place, and all the people are somewhere else at the same time. So all the people sure do get around. Now, here's where it gets funny, to me anyway. Adonijah and all the guests who were with them heard it as they were finishing their feast. On hearing the sound of the trumpet, Joab asked, "What's the meaning of all the noise in the city?" Even as he was speaking, Jonathan, son of Abiathar, the priest, arrived. Adonijah said, "Come in. A worthy man like you must be bringing good news." "Not at all," Jonathan answered. "Our Lord King David has made Solomon king. The king has sent with him Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Zariah, blah, 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 and the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and they have put him on the king's mule. And Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anointed him king at Gihon. From there they have gone up cheering, and the city resounds with it." That's the noise you hear. "Moreover, Solomon has taken his seat on the royal throne." Uh-oh. "Also, the royal officials have come to congratulate our Lord King David, saying, 'May your God make Solomon's name more famous than yours and his throne greater than yours.' And the king bowed in worship on his bed and said, 'Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has allowed my eyes to see a successor on my throne today.'" You know, never been at a party that suddenly goes bad? At this, all Adonijah's guests rose in alarm and dispersed. Oh, it was great. You could just like see him. Oh, I had a great time. Great time. Got to get up early. They all had an early morning all of a sudden, and dispersed. But Adonijah, in fear of Solomon, went and took hold of the horns of the altar. Then Solomon was told, "Adonijah is afraid of King Solomon and is clinging to the horns of the altar. He says, 'Let King Solomon swear to me today, they will not put his servant to death with the sword.'" So if I didn't look it up, it's in Leviticus. If you grab onto the horns of the altar, it's like sanctuary, but you're only supposed to be able to do it if you killed someone accidentally, or you did something that wasn't done with like deviousness of heart, basically. Now Adonijah, I guess he hasn't killed anyone yet, so he's just well, he's afraid. It's not a bad move though. He's grabbing the hold of the horns of the altar. Solomon replied, "If he shows himself to be worthy, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground. But if evil is found in him, he will die." Then King Solomon sent men, and they brought him down from the altar. And Adonijah came and bowed down to King Solomon, and Solomon said, "Go to your home." So we have in the first chapter of Kings the transition. All right. Oh, hi, Monty. And so Solomon is going to dominate the first half of First Kings. Right? And what is Solomon known for? What trait? What quality?
Wisdom.
Wisdom. Because like there's one big example that everyone knows. We'll get to eventually in chapter 3, where he has to deal with the kid, right? Whose kid is this? But first, if he's going to be king, and he already had 2 brothers who tried to be king before him, whatever his special relationship is with the Lord, it might not be a bad idea politically to consolidate your power. And that's what Solomon proceeds to do. Luckily, David gives him an excuse as to how he can do it, and make it sound or make it look like well, not say that it wouldn't be, but so everyone knows that the Lord wanted this to happen. It makes him look a little less bloodthirsty when David says in chapter 2, "Kill this guy and that guy and that guy." Right? So when Solomon actually does it, it looks a little bit less like what it obviously is, somebody consolidating their power. You know? How are we all doing, by the way?
Fine.
Right.
Good.
I'm learning a lot.
Mhm.
How are you doing today, Reverend Johnson?
We're doing good. Happy to be able to join the study instead of running around taking kids to the dentist.
I'm sure they're happier that you're at study too.
Yeah, they're happy it's
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
The dentist is no fun.
Yeah, one thing, Kevin, I noticed that, they basically told David, well, Solomon's going to have a greater reign or something like that than you. That was a little surprising that they would say that to David. I thought. I wonder if that's one of those things that got stuck in later. So.
Yeah, indeed. It very well might have been. That makes a lot of sense, actually, that it would be. I'm just getting chapter 2.
I have a question. The riding on a mule, regardless of whether it's a mule or a horse, is that symbolic that Solomon gets on the mule to ride?
Well, you would figure the mules would have to be. Mules were probably royal because they were probably imported, maybe from Egypt. And
I don't think we've established still when horses made it into this area.
right.
So it may have been, the mule may have been kind of not only symbolic, but also the kind of other than the camels, a standard way of transport.
Mm-hmm.
What about donkeys?
Well, there's a donkey showing up here I think in chapter 2 or 3. So we got donkeys and we got mules.
Got it.
Yeah. I wish I knew more about the difference between donkeys and everything else. I'm such a city boy. I look at anything and it's a horse.
Yeah.
It's all a horse to me. All right, so I'm going to move on to chapter 2 real quick because I want to get through this this story of Solomon like establishing himself. All right, 1 second here.
While Kevin's doing that, let me just tell Monty, I am recording, but I forgot, and so it's a couple minutes into the talk.
You see my screen?
Yeah.
Not yet.
No?
We don't see the text yet. We're
See
seeing
that
that.
they're searching.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, we got BibleGateway.com.
All right.
I'm curious why you chose the New International Version. I like it too, but
I grew up with NIV. I've been reading NIV my whole life. I'm just used to NIV.
Yeah.
Simple as that, really.
there we go.
Yeah. What's your preferred version?
That's the one I like.
Oh, see there you go.
But you know, those Lutherans, they always want to do the whatever NRSV.
You know, when I was growing up in the Missouri Synod Church, we did the Revised Standard, and then for some reason, when confirmation came, and my mom got me a annotated Bible, you know, nicely stamped with my name on it, like you're supposed to get when you're 14. It was NIV, so it's always been NIV ever since.
Yeah, I found that they are both very good translations. When I send out the Psalms for the silent prayer, I've discovered the NIV is quite superior to the New Revised Standard. But for other things, like when I was doing the study on Isaiah, I like the New Revised Standard. So everybody has their preferences.
Yeah, yeah. The first time I ever read the Bible seriously as like, you know, let's sit down and read and see what's in this, sometime in late grade school or early high school. There was a King James in the hallway by the encyclopedias at my grandparents' house that no one had ever opened. And I tried that for a minute or two. I can't do that. So then I looked around, and my mom had a copy. You remember in the late 1970s? Remember the Living Bible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
All right. It's pretty awful, but it is very readable. Uh, so that was the first time I got a lot of this. Okay, so Solomon comes to David to get some advice. Solomon, our king. When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. I am about to go the way of all the earth. So he's getting poetic. So be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him, and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. In other words, keep the covenant relationship. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. Now you yourself, know what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me, what he did to the two commanders of Israel's armies, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether. He killed them, shedding their blood in peacetime as if in battle. And with that blood, he stained the belt around his waist and the sandals on his feet. Deal with him according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. So if this was being filmed for a movie, there would have to be the flashback sequence now. Back to 2 Samuel, where Joab does a couple of assassinations, and it's not entirely clear. It's just of his own initiative, but let's say it is. Joab is like very popular with the armies. He's been in charge of the armies for quite a while. Now here's the other side of the coin, right? But show kindness to the sons of Barzeh of Gilead, and let them be among those who eat at your table. They stood by me when I fled from your brother Absalom. So that's going to take care of the army transition. And remember, you have Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim. Sounds like a Stephen Sondheim musical, the Benjamite from Bahurim, who called down bitter curses on me the day I went to Mahanaim. That. When he came down to meet me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to death by the sword. But now, do not consider him innocent. You are a man of wisdom. You will know what to do. Bring his gray head down to the grave in blood. Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. He actually gives you the idea that his last words were kill this guy and kill that guy. Hopefully those weren't literally his last words, because that's a horrible way to go out. But it is good advice. What he's telling him is, here's who you have to worry about, right? These are two guys who could conspire with other people internally and have the clout to put people together. So look out for them. So then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. Again, I don't think they called it the city of David as David was being buried in it. So that might be a later way of saying it. He had reigned 40 years over Israel, 7 years in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established. All right, back to Adonijah, the guy who was king for an afternoon. Now Adonijah, son of Haggith, went to Bathsheba, because he's not dumb, went to the king's mother, right? Bathsheba asked him, do you come peacefully? He's like, what are you doing here? And he answered, yes, peacefully. And then he added, I have something to say to you. You may say it. As you know, the kingdom was mine, all right? It was mine. All Israel looked to me as their king, all the people. But then things changed. It was a hell of an afternoon. And the kingdom has gone to my brother, for it has come to him from the Lord. So he's seeming to acknowledge this is the way it should be, but it was mine. Now I have one request to make of you. Do not refuse me. You may make it. So he continued, please ask King Solomon, for he will not refuse you, to give me Abishag the Shunammite as my wife. Now remember, she's like very beautiful and assumably still a virgin, right? Because David never had relations with her. Very well, Bathsheba says, I will speak to the king for you. Apparently she doesn't think much of it. She apparently doesn't isn't that concerned. When Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah, the king stood up to meet her, bowed down to her, and sat down on his throne. Then he had a throne brought in for his mother, and she sat down at his right hand. I have one small request to make of you. Do not refuse me. And he replied, make it my mother. I will not refuse you. So she said, let Abishag the Shunammite be given in marriage to your brother Adonijah. He didn't think that was such a great idea. He answered his mother, why do you request Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? You might as well request the kingdom for him. After all, he is my older brother. Yes, for him and for Abiathar the priest and Joab son of Zeruiah. Then King Solomon swore by the Lord. And you're going to see this expression, if we read enough Kings, you'll see this expression a dozen times. May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if Adonijah does not pay with his life for this request. So why do you think this like ticks Solomon off so much? What would it be about this request that he sees treachery in? I was actually kind of curious at myself. I asked the question to my kids when I was doing that just to see what their answers were. Not to grade them on it, because I wasn't quite sure myself.
Is he concerned about a line of descent that somehow she was close to King David? And I don't know.
If she had been King David's wife, it would make, or one of his wives, it would make a lot more sense to me. Mm-hmm. But the author went out of his way to point out that David did not have relations with her. Right? So she stayed at kind of like that servant level with David. So I'm not sure what Solomon sees in it, but he sees something. So
did he just like her for himself?
Possibly, as he certainly had a way with the ladies. See you later. I think 400 or 500.
And the other question is, well, the author tells us that David didn't have relations. Maybe that wasn't commonly known or commonly considered. So maybe most of the people thought, well, this was a wife.
That's true. And actually, the NIV text note hits on exactly that. That it was about perception, right? To the people, again, all the people, right, who think of one mind, right? To the people, they've seen her with David during his last amount of time, how long she was with him, and it's going to look like this guy took over that role. So Solomon, he's not having it. All right. Adonijah shall be put to death today. And so King Solomon gave orders to Benaiah, and he struck down Adonijah and he died. Boom. Killed his brother. Yeah. Brother. Yeah. He has others. He had others. I think so. That's 3 dead sons of David at this point. So Abiathar the priest, the king said, go back to your fields. So he didn't kill the priest. That's nice. Go back to your fields and Anathoth. You deserve to die, but I will not put you to death now, because you carried the ark of the sovereign Lord before my father David and shared all my father's hardships. So Solomon removed him from the priesthood, fulfilling the word the Lord had spoken at Shiloh, which again is in 2 Samuel, another flashback sequence there. When the news reached Joab, right, who had conspired with Adonijah, though not with Absalom, he fled to the tent of the Lord and took hold of the horns of the altar. So twice in 2 chapters, they're following the same strategy. However, like I mentioned earlier, that strategy is supposed to work for people who spill blood innocent of intent or by mistake or something like that. It's not supposed to be for cold-blooded murderers and assassins.
It only works as long as your arms aren't tired. So. Yeah.
D2, all the pictures that they showed, the children's books, all this, I have everything on ground level, so you can basically kneel and just hold it like there. But King Solomon was told that Joab had fled to the tent of the Lord and was beside the altar. Then Solomon ordered Benaiah, go, strike him down. Well, apparently, Benaiah wasn't totally sure about it at first. So he enters the tent of the Lord and says to Joab, the king says, come out. Joab says, no, I'm going to die here. Benaiah reported to the king, this is how reported to Solomon, this is how he answered me. So the king again says to him, do as he says, strike him down and bury him, and so clear in my whole family of the guilt of the innocent blood that Joab shed. The Lord will pay him for the blood he shed, because without my father David knowing it, he attacked 2 men and killed them with the sword. Both of them, Abner. Now again, what he's doing is he's relating the same story that David related to him earlier in the chapter, right? And it seems like he's building a case for justifiable homicide. Right? May the guilt of their blood rest on the head of Joab and his descendants forever. But on David and his descendants, including me, his house and his throne, may there be the Lord's peace forever. So Benaiah, he goes and strikes down Joab and kills him right there. He was buried out in his own country, in his own field. The king then put Benaiah over the army in Joab's position. So he kills his predecessor and replaced the priest. That was Zadok, who had remained loyal during this latest revolution. So the big 3 who had come and warned everybody about what was going on with the son that was in rebellion, they're all rewarded, right? They end up in head of the army. They end up with the priesthood. Now Shimei, he was supposed to have, was coming to him, sent back in 2 Samuel. The king sent for him, says, build yourself a house in Jerusalem and live there, but do not go anywhere else. The day you leave and cross the Kidron Valley, you can be sure you will die. Your blood is on your own head. And he says, that's a great idea. What do you say is good? Your servant will do as my lord the king has said. It's better than dying. Right? So he builds a house, he stays there. Good for him. Then 3 years later, he has a moment of forgetfulness. Or maybe he just thinks he can get away with it. Probably 2 of his slaves run away. And they run off to Maacah, king of Gath, one of the Philistine cities. And Shimei was told, your slaves are in Gath, which is a nice way to get to the point with the information. At this, he saddled his donkey. There's a donkey now. And went to Gath and found his slaves. He found him. He brought him back. Solomon was told that he had left Jerusalem and gone to Gath and returned. So the king summoned him and said to him, did I not make you swear by the Lord and warn you, on the day you leave to go anywhere else, you can be sure you will die. At that time you said to me, that's a great idea. I'm going to obey it. Why then did you not keep your oath and obey the command I gave you? The king also said to him, you know in your heart all the wrong you did to my father David. Now the Lord will pay you for your wrongdoing. But King Solomon will be blessed. And David's throne will remain secure before the Lord forever. So either King Solomon is suddenly talking about himself in the third person, or another historical addition that says, hey, but this. All right. So the king gave orders to his army guy, Benaiah, and he went out and it struck him down and he died. Apparently he wasn't standing right in front of him anymore. He had left. And then he goes out and gets killed. And at the end of the chapter, the kingdom is now established in Solomon's hands. Right? Everybody who could have been a problem is now been dealt with. Right? So Solomon, the 4th oldest son, has established his kingdom.
Kind of like today.
Indeed, it's not an unrecognizable historical moment.
No.
Right.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So is killing all these people in retribution considered still following the covenant? It's kosher to do that?
Well, it seems to be the implication. What do you think, Pastor?
I'm reading about mules and donkeys. So
Well,
I didn't
Do you
hear.
think that all this, like, I don't want to call it retribution
Oh.
murder, right? Because the Lord tells David, David tells Solomon, Solomon tells his guy, right? Um, but it does, when I read through it, it does seem to be pretty, it strikes me as not unrelated to the secular examples of
Yeah.
people coming to power who might not otherwise have been coming to power because of their relationship within the hierarchy.
So is this righteous behavior? Is that kind of the question?
Right, right.
And yeah, well, I guess there's a lot of stories that we have to, I feel like we have to bracket in a way and just realize that we're talking about something 3,000 years ago. And there's a sense in which God's project to make a nation of Abraham, now in the form of King David and his successors, that there's a mission for the greater purpose of revealing God to the world, and that covers a whole multitude of sins. And ultimately, the sins get to be more and more and more as the kings get progressively worse. And that's the whole project is going to kind of fall apart in the exile. And I think what emerges is a different sense of God's grace at work in the world, how it works and who's blessed by it, and that makes way for a figure like Jesus, like Christ, who has a really bad life, but is the Son of God.
so you're saying that at this period, the ends justify the means within righteous Judaism.
I think that's certainly how they think of it, and it's an analogous in my mind too to some of the movies that like The Lord of the Rings, or these great mighty battles of good versus evil. There's a whole lot of killing, but there's a sense that something better is taking over, taking hold.
Well, I think you have to see this as a kind of a grand scheme, which is put together by the editor of this book, again, probably right around the time of the exile, probably. But the point of view is that there is a covenant with David and with his successors, and whatever you need to do to make sure that lineage continues is good. It doesn't matter if it involves bloodshed and murder or treachery or whatever. The goodness exists because of the covenant with David and his descendants. I think it's interesting what the part that Kevin has read with us here. There are three struggles going on. One is within the kingship itself. There's a second one within the religious leadership. And that, by the way, is a conflict that continues down to the time that this book was finally edited. And then thirdly, there was a military confrontation. And Joab was probably a combination Secretary of Defense and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And so it was very significant. He had significant military power, but Solomon had to destroy that in order to maintain his control of the kingdom.
Indeed. I mean, Joab is no minor figure. And one of the first things I mentioned there in chapter 1, when Adonijah launches his revolt and he gets Joab on his side, that's quite a coup, because Joab is all over Samuel as
Right.
as an enforcer, not just anything
Yes.
else. So he was
in worship these days, we're in a semi-continuous lectionary going through the stories of the patriarchs. And right from the very beginning with Abraham and Sarah, there's lots of bad behavior, and whether it be with Hagar and Ishmael and compromises when the Egyptians come and Sarah to pretend to be a concubine or something. So God's faithfulness is tested right off the beginning, from the beginning of this covenant, and God remains steadfast. Yeah, despite the fact that all these people are flawed in so many ways, and keep demonstrating their flaws.
But those flaws do make for more interesting reading. So
Yeah.
Well, the flaws make them normal humans, in some respects.
Yeah, indeed.
Right.
And if you compare this with, other situations where you have turnover of leadership, Richard III in England pops into my head. He killed off a lot of folks to sort of consolidate his throne for the little while that he was on it. That I think the interesting part here is that God didn't step in and say, nope, you don't do this, and eliminate that and go with somebody else, but because of the covenant.
Yeah. Well, at least like as we go on, we get to see some compassion as well, in these kind of books, and some real wisdom. Not that this isn't wisdom, right? Not that it works. And Solomon's a smart guy. Well, he might not have been smart in taking so many wives, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
And Lutherans are fond of order, public and civic order, as being ingredients to support the life of faith, in the two kingdoms theology, and certainly this does protect the rule of Solomon and all the people with it, a more secure life.
That
Indeed.
maybe is the theology that President Trump relies on too.
Yeah.
If he even knows what theology is.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
No, you're not. Indeed. Well, guys, I hope that hasn't been a waste of an hour anyway for you.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Kevin.
And I must admit, it has been, for me, probably 60 years since I first came through. And so, long time on a couple of the Old Testament books. So this is really great. I really enjoyed that.
I hope we continue to have some fun with it.
Yeah.
Years ago, my son,
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Wait, one sec,
Oh,
Mary
please.
Ann.
Yeah, Mary Ann.
Mary Ann wanted to say something.
I said,
Uh-oh.
James Bible, and my son asked if I give it to him, and I said, why do you want the King James? He said, I like the way it's written. It's much more poetic.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, there are some things in the King James where the poetry is there, and of course you have to think about it just as Luther's translation of the Bible established how the German language developed. The King James really helped establish how English developed. In a lot of ways, and so it's really an important book for a lot of concerns, not just the religious ones.
But I think the King James we have to look at it as a historical artifact.
Yeah.
It is not a Bible for today. It is filled with errors, a lot of really bad translation, and we have much. I think we have probably at least a dozen better translations available today.
Absolutely.
My son was in the 7th or 8th grade, and he said he loved reading the King James.
Well, good
Well, I
for
keep a King
him.
James version around too.
Oh,
A lot more.
It is interesting, if you go to a funeral, the King James version of the 23rd Psalm, it gets used in Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish ceremonies.
Wow.
I always tell people that, at my funeral, 75 years from now, I don't want them to read from the one only chapter of Obadiah, because no one ever reads Obadiah. So while I'm lying there with, at graveside, they say, "Woe to you, O Edom." It'll be fun. It'll be fun for the people. All
Yeah.
the people.
Well,
All right. Well, I hope y'all. I can see some of y'all, or all of y'all, next week at the same time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, guys.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good day.